Okay, you're good, Father.
Does that look all right? Okay, dear ones. So tonight, if you have your notes, let's go over the objectives. So this is our first catechism class in a long series of catechumen classes that are going to just help us to get from A to B, God willing. So the students, so here's our goals and objectives for tonight. Now, usually we'll start out our lessons like this. So the student is going to learn the basic direction that we're going to go in the catechism program. Number 2, the student will learn about the Didache and the importance of the Didache and try to gain a true understanding of how it is related to the Orthodox Christianity. Next, come on in. Hi guys. The student will learn the true context of how the church began. So we'll do a little bit of a history lesson. The student will also learn about the dates of the writing of the New Testament. And finally, the student will learn the significance of the date of the Didache and the New Testament books. And then we'll begin to start going through the Didache. So some of this is going to be a bit of a review, and we're going to go very quickly through the review stuff. Anybody here local need a pen or would like a pen?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, let me.
Zane would like this.
Okay.
Pretty good.
How many do we need?
You,
Here you go. 1, 2, 3. Let me know if those don't work, and then we can go to some other ones. Did you need a pen? Okay. So how many of you have gone over the Inquirers series, just so I can know? Because if I can know, okay, all of you guys, except for maybe Anna. Okay, and I know Thomas has not, but that's okay. So some of the stuff that we're going to go over tonight is really just brushing over some of those lessons, but then we'll get into the meat of it very quick. So here we go. The method that we're going to use, here's our introduction to the catechism, dear ones. Number 1, or A, we're going to get a general and basic understanding of Orthodox Christianity. That is what I'm sharing you now is what I hope to accomplish through the whole of the catechumenate period, so a basic understanding of Orthodox Christianity, what I think should be basic. So it's not seminary level, but I can guarantee you that it is going to be more in depth than most catechisms, but I think that those are lousy, and I don't think that they're basic. I think that they're subpar, and that they leave everybody hanging, and people then go around kind of nebulously floating like, I wonder if this is okay, or how should we live here, and all this stuff. I don't think this is acceptable at all. But what we're going to do is very basic, and so even though you might be like, holy cow, sorry, I shouldn't say holy cow, forgive me. Even though you're going to be like, wow, some of this is really heavy, and it seems meaty, it will seem meaty because there's a handful of you who are already baptized Orthodox Christians, but then there are the rest of you who are catechumens. And it's, of course, going to seem heavy because you're leaving the world and you're entering into the church. And so you're passing from death to life. And there's a lot of information, there's a lot of change, there's a lot of activity that's happening during this period. So it's going to seem heavy, but it is just general and basic information in the Orthodox Church as far as information side of it. We're going to give a historical setting and the development of the Orthodox Church and the kingdom of God, because the Orthodox Church is the kingdom of God, a true and real nation. C, we're going to cover the most basic principles in Christian praxis, which is Christian living, how do we live, and a basic understanding of the books of the New Testament in the order that they were written. And then we are also going to study the services, the main services, the main feast day services, that come throughout the year. There's 12 main ones outside of Pascha and outside of Lent period and Pascha and outside of the Nativity of Christ. And so those ones we're going to integrate into the classes and also many other services. So the method of achieving these goals will be an integrated approach using the Didache, the Orthodox catechetical books, and several other books that you will be required to read or listen to. We're going to be going also through St. Basil's basic teaching on the Christian life, which is out of a book called The Christian Ethics. And we will be going through many other books of the New Testament in a very simple but basic introductory way, starting with the books written earliest and moving to the latter ones. And I don't want anybody to be deceived. We're not going to get through all of the books of the New Testament. It would be impossible, especially with this new introduction into the program of going over the services. That's really the most important thing, the services and some of the other basic information, because if you learn the services, you will learn all of the doctrines of the church if you pay attention. That's why it's so egregious that most churches don't have any of the services that contain the doctrine. The doctrines are contained in the Vespers, the Matins, the Compline, and the Midnight offices, which we just are rarely offered anywhere. So we're going to go over, when we do these services, we're going to even do those, even though you may not go to those services that are held, you'll still read, we'll go over the Troparion and so forth. The results, hopefully, will be a very simple yet incredibly educational catechism. We will be learning about the church and what the church desires us to become. What does God want us to become? And ultimately, we will learn how to practice the Orthodox faith. Just like Jude wrote in his letter, the faith that was delivered once for all, it is this faith that we want to start growing in. And our aim is not just that you will learn the faith that was delivered once for all, but that you will become a true and elite soldier of the Lord Jesus Christ, able to fight the good fight, able to finish the course, and will be found to be a good and faithful slave when you stand before the great judgment seat of God. That is the goal of this catechism. And one thing you need to understand, dear ones, is that catechism, the period of catechism in the life of the Orthodox Christian, is the most important period of your whole Christian life. This is why it's so sad, and so many people, me included, who have had like a super fast catechism, or just very fast. Like you come into the church and then it's like, some people have even gone through 4-week catechisms that are basically like, read these books and as soon as you're done, we'll baptize you. That's a real hindrance to people, because what you accomplish during your catechism will set you on the path and it's basically going to set you on the path for all of eternity. The safest period of your Christian life is after your catechumenate prayers and before you're baptized. Because during this period of your Orthodox life, you are considered an Orthodox Christian, and if you're faithful and you're faithfully working out your salvation, you're working on your praxis, you're learning the things, you're listening to the guidance, you're asking questions to the priest, you're obeying, please don't do this, don't read those, read these, and you're really trying, this is the safest period. And if you die in a car accident, as my position is, and the position of a good number of the fathers of the church, is that you will be found to be a faithful Orthodox Christian, and you'll get a Christian burial at this parish. Same with Father Josiah and many others. So what does that mean? It means you don't have to rush. It means you don't have to be panicked. It means that you can take your time and you can really grow. What happens after you're baptized is the standard that you are held to is extremely high. It's an extremely high standard. So there are literally hundreds and thousands of us who got baptized very quick and were not really encouraged to take a nice, timely catechism to work out a lot of stuff. And so then we have a lot of stuff to work out afterwards. And our struggle is much greater because the attacks demonically are serious. So all that to say, dear ones, is don't worry about it taking a long time. Don't worry about it. It's the most safe place you can be. And for all of the other ones who will be listening to this who have already gone through, a maybe less than stellar catechism, not that this is going to be perfect. I mean, I'm learning and growing. I'm taking the example from a lot of people. But there's nothing to do for us except to start from where we were at and live the next day and try to do the best we can and try to go from today to tomorrow and do a little better every day, to gain a little better praxis, to gain a little more worship of God, to clear our noose a little more. Okay, so for us, those who have been baptized Orthodox Christians, that's our goal. For you who have not yet been baptized, the goal is this praxis that we'll talk about eventually, the purification of your spiritual eye, which is your noose. So with that said, if there's any questions there on the Zoom side, just go ahead and put them up or unmute and say, hey, Father, I've got a question. And then we can pause it, the lecture, and then just stop, because I want to make sure that we are able to field all the questions. Any questions so far? Okay. These class periods are probably going to be less long than the other catechism program we had, because I'm not having St. Basil plus my other, I'm not trying to squeeze 2 topics in one, because eventually we'll get to St. Basil and that will be the only thing that we study. And then we'll go on to these other topics. So, okay. If you look on your notes, we're going to go to the section that is Roman numeral number 2, a basic history of the church. So the very earliest time of the church and the development of the scriptural writings of the apostles. This is what we're going to go through. So this is, again, should be a review if everybody listened to the Inquirer's class. But the church started in Jerusalem. Of course, Jesus started it. He commissioned his apostles when he ascended into heaven, and then he died on the cross. Then he was with his apostles for about 4 weeks until the ascension of Christ, 4.5 weeks. So he rose on Sunday, early Sunday morning, and then he ascended on Thursday. That's why our feast day is Thursday. So if you can, get the Wednesday afternoon off and Thursday, because we'll have a big service on Wednesday night and then Thursday. And then we have a big fellowship feast for our feast day. But then 10 days later, the Holy Spirit came and fell on the apostles. And that is the birth of the Church of Christ. The Church of Christ. If we remember in the Catechism, you have the Church of the Noetic beings first. Then you have the Church of those faithful to God Almighty in the Old Testament time. And then the third phase of the church was the Church of Christ, which is the culmination, the joining back of the terrestrials, us, to God in that communion that God did not want to let go away. So that happened in Jerusalem, and primarily right away it was Jewish converts. And if you remember in the book of Acts, it was the disciples first, 120, 500, then it went to 3,000, and then very quickly in another chapter you see 5,000 were converted, and it just was like exponential right away. It met in the temple and worshiped right away in the temple. They practiced the hours of prayer in the temple, just like we have the hours of prayer now. They also had something that was similar to Vespers there that happened at the end of the day. When they had the Eucharist, they shared it at home right away, because they weren't breaking bread there in the temple. The people who had not converted would not have comprehended that. At the beginning of the church, their primary prayer book was the Psalter. And still to this day in the Orthodox Church, our services are primarily filled with the Psalter and then pieces of the New Testament. F, the use of the Old Testament scriptures, especially focused on the focus of the prophets like Isaiah, were the focus of the teaching of the church, and they used the Septuagint in the early church, the Masoretic text, which is what the Old Testament of the Protestant Bible is, was not used by the early church, nor is it used to this day by Orthodox Christians. So in the Masoretic text, which we will talk specifically about this in one of our classes in the future, but the Masoretic text is a text that a group of rabbis after the 4th century came together, and they had a council called the Council of Jambros, I think is how you pronounce the word. But at any rate, they went through the scriptures and they translated it back into Hebrew, where they found some other Hebrew text lines. And because the Septuagint version was so clearly messianic that you could not deny that Jesus was the Christ. And so many Jews were converting so fast that they were just like, we got to cut the bleed off. And then they instituted the Masoretic text.
Can I ask a question about the Masoretic text following? So we know that when Martin Luther and the other reformers came along, that they removed like the Maccabees, Judah, Tobit, all of that. But did that exist in the Masoretic text before the Reformation, or did the Jews take that out too?
I'm not sure about that. That's a great question, which it's in the other lesson, but off the top of my head without reviewing, I'm not sure what the answer to that is. I know that they knew it, but I think they had it in their text, but they identified this as after the prophets. Okay. These books would have been after the prophets, after the time of, or during the time of Babylon. Okay. So, and so for them, it would have been considered deuterocanonical, which means outside of that period of time. But anyways, that we don't want to get in the weeds on that topic tonight, but that's just a history. So the main point of that is that the Orthodox Church uses the Septuagint just like it has always used it. So when I have you read through the Old Testament, I want you to use the Septuagint version, which is funny because I assumed that my guys that I'm training to become deacons, when I assigned them to read through the Old Testament, one of them started reading a different version, and then it was like, this does not make any sense. And I was like, you're reading out of the Septuagint, right? And he was like, no, I didn't know I had to. And I'm like, oh, dear one. Of course, that's what we read out of. You can read out of the Masoretic as like a compare and contrast if you want. It's not like it's a sin, but I'm just saying like what our text, our official text is the Septuagint, and it doesn't make any sense to spend your time reading out of the other. It just doesn't make any sense at all. Because when you read through the Septuagint text and you're familiar with the services, I mean, it's just like a puzzle fitting perfectly together. Okay. G, there were no New Testament books written until AD 50. Does everybody understand that, or had you known that? Isn't that amazing? The church existed without a New Testament for nearly 20 years. That's amazing. It's very significant because in our culture that we live in this sola scriptura culture, everybody thinks that the church was put together because there were scholars and academics reading through the New Testament and then determining how to operate the local church. And that's not how it happened. That's not how it happened at all. The church was started and it was guided by the Holy Spirit through the teaching and the guidance of the apostles and their bishops, which all of this stuff will go into much more depth. H, in the early church, the authority lie completely in the hands of the apostles, who then pass this on to the bishops and the deacons, and eventually the bishops ordained priests to help them because the church expanded so much. And so the priests are the representative of the bishop, and they do the bishop's bidding. So the church is, the local church is a bishop's church. And I obey him. Every priest obeys their bishop. And that's how it's been from the very beginning. And from the beginning, the beginning of the church, its services were liturgical to one degree or another. Now they expanded their liturgical makeup and beauty, and the content grew as time grew. But it was always liturgical because it was built off of the stuff that those who were faithful Jewish believers of Yahweh were doing. And that was set up even all the way back by the time of Moses, and even actually some before, that you had the worship of God in a very liturgical, ordered manner. And then when the early church started, they worshiped in the temple for a very long time. Well, not a very long time, but for what we would think of as a considerable time before the persecution happened in Jerusalem. They worshiped in the temple, and then they broke bread at home where they had the love feast, and they also had the Eucharist being done at home. So you had this. Somebody have a question?
Yes, Father. I was going to ask, did they worship only the early believers, the early Christians? Did they worship only in the temple at Jerusalem, or did they also worship in other synagogues where the congregation had?
Ooh, that's a great. Yeah, that's a great question. Mm-hmm. I don't really know the answer to that. I think it was primarily in the temple of Jerusalem, because that's where the church started, right? And so right away you had the people were being converted in Jerusalem. And you can read in the book of Acts, all of the activity right away was in Jerusalem. Particularly, there is a phrase or a sentence in the Acts of the Apostles that there were so many priests converting to following Christ as the Messiah that the high priest was just like, we're losing control of this. We've got to do something about it. And that's when Saul was commissioned to start crushing the church. And this is when the big persecution happened. Stephen, my saint Stephen, the proto-martyr, was stoned to death with Saul standing right by his side. So I'm pretty sure it started locally, but then as you read through the book of Acts, you see people who had been baptized with the baptism of John who were Jewish. And so we can presume that they were worshiping in their limited way the God of Christ, who they thought was the Messiah, but they hadn't been baptized yet as Christians and stuff. So there's a lot of information we don't know immediately, but primarily it was in Jerusalem. And it did not take long because, mind you, those who were baptized Christians were taking the Eucharist, not in the temple. They were taking it at the homes all through Jerusalem of different people. Okay? So the answer is yes to your direct question, but not so much in the other synagogues, but yes, in people's houses when they were taking the Eucharist, which was a special service that was done outside of time, which we'll get into later. Okay, so now we're going to shift. Does anybody have any questions? I know that was like the history of the early church in like 5 minutes, but does anybody have any questions about that before we shift on?
Real quick, Father.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry to make you backtrack one, but I didn't get the date when you said there were no New Testament books until, what was the?
AD 50.
Okay.
50. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, and we're going to talk about why this is so significant because it relates into the Didache here in just a bit.
About the books, and I hope my question is not outrageous. I mean it is legitimate, because it is something I've wondered about, especially the book of Jasher. I believe it's referenced twice in the Holy Scriptures, at least twice. And I've read what is stated or claims to be the book of Jasher, which seems to, for the most part, go over stories of the Old Testament in more detail. There's some things that seem peculiar, I might say. So I've wondered about the book of Jasher, and also I think Enoch is referred to.
Right.
As
so forgive me.
In the book of Enoch also.
Yeah, so forgive me for cutting you short, but those two books are referred to, but they would have been considered Old Testament textual references. They were not New Testament books. They would have not been considered New Testament books. So they were.
I don't think
Yeah.
they were New Testament. Even
Yeah.
As far as Old Testament, are they canonical or in any way? And if not canonical, are they useful? And if so, then.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in another time. The book of Enoch and the book of Jasher. We're going to stay on track, but those are good questions. You'll find out, dear ones, that I'm super bad at staying on track. I'm going to try. Nick is shaking his head. He likes it when I get off track a little.
I'm tangential myself.
So now we're going to shift into the Didache, because this is really what we want to get into tonight, because it's very beneficial for us, and we're going to be in the Didache for at least 2 or 3 weeks here. So the Didache, the church used the Didache as its primary teaching of the basics of Christianity right away. Modern scholarship has dated the apostles putting the Didache together and sending it out around AD 48. This was before the first letters of the apostles. Now, before I speak about that, I just want to mention this. There are some very, very excellent books written that would talk about the liturgy and talk about all sorts of historical things, but they were written like I'm reading a book by this man named, his name is Didache, and he was a liturgical master, if you will. He was not Orthodox, but I think he wished he could have been Orthodox if you read it, because he's going through and he's doing all of this major study about liturgics, like how did we get the service, how did the liturgy, the divine liturgy, come together, and so forth. But books like his and others that I've read, really, that are identifying majorly important piece of information, they will refer to the Didache as written late, like in the hundreds, the early 100s or later, because everybody at that point in history, like in the 1900s or the mid, and like from 1950 and before, all did not know when it was written, because they only saw references to it and they just could not believe that it was actually written early. Okay, so they would have heard somebody like me saying 1948 and say, like, this is absurd, 1948. The reason I'm telling you this is because I don't want you to read those books that say, oh, at 105, the Didache was passed around, but by this time the church had already developed, quite a bit further than what we read in the Didache. The reason that they didn't have it is because they didn't have any primary manuscripts. They were just reading other people that referred to it, and they just knew of it kind of out here in the ether, the intellectual realms out here, like, oh, the Didache, oh, the apostolic constitutions, but they didn't have their hands on a primary text that they could date. But later on, after the 50s, they actually found the Didache in Syriac caves dating all the way back that were undeniably dated back before like 48 with other primary sources that they could use to scientifically prove. So why am I saying this? Because there's still a lot of scholarship today that will not use those because they do not want the implications of what would be the implications that would result from the Didache actually being this early, because it would have a lot of very serious ramifications. Like, there is no denying that the Orthodox Church is the one church, and that sola scriptura was not the main thing. And I mean, just there's a whole bunch of ramifications. If it was later on, then they can talk away a whole bunch of stuff, and they can talk away a lot of church orders that were written on top of it, like the apostolic canons, which they don't want to accept, and the apostolic constitutions, at least the first 5 books of them, they also don't want to accept, because they say very serious things, and these scholars would like everyone to believe that the church was actually pretty loose and not very serious about a lot of moral things until the second generation. Then they kind of ramped up this morality thing, and that's why they wrote these things in pseudography to make it seem like the apostles wanted people to be really serious. But actually, we know in the early church it was like super laid back and living kind of not really godly lives. But then it got really serious, and then there was a period of about 250 years of very serious Orthodox living, and then Constantine came in and people cooled down. But everybody, I'm talking like these scholars, don't worry about it. Our way of life that is actually secular and not according to the teaching of the church, then back to them, is actually okay, because it's very much more similar to the earliest part of the church. That's why they don't want to date the Didache. Go ahead.
And it seems more scandalous to find out that they even believed that there was no actual church after Constantine. You know, they'll just
those
deny
people.
any of the councils and the whole thing with, like what you mentioned too. They, even to this day, they're getting called out. You know, scholars are getting called out for only using secondary and third sources to cite their work. But yeah, like you said, not touching on primary sources and then getting pretty embarrassed.
Yeah, it's true. So, so here we go. What is the Didache? The Didache is the earliest church order document. So what is a church order document? Well, it's very simply, it's like what the people who are in charge at the time want the priests or the bishops and the deacons in the church to function. So how they want us to behave. So it has to do with discipline and order. Like, we do this. This is how we baptize people. This is how we operate a service. This is how we want you to deal with people in confession and so forth. That's a church order. Later on, they have the church order from the apostles, the apostolic constitution, which is vociferous. It's very huge. Then you have others like Hippolytus. Hippolytus has a book called On the Apostolic Tradition. He was the Bishop of Rome in the 200s, and he has his church order, which is basically built on the Didache, the Apostolic Constitutions, the Didascalia, Apostolarium, which some people debate, and then his, which has even like a list of jobs. So it has a list of jobs that the catechumens would come in if they wanted to be a Christian, and they had any of these jobs, they either had to quit those jobs or they couldn't become a Christian. This is like in the church orders. This is what a church order is. So pretty interesting stuff. Go ahead, Thomas.
Should that still exist today?
It actually does. The question, you mean like if you're in certain jobs, you shouldn't be allowed to become a Christian, or you need to change them?
Yes.
Yes, faithful priests and faithful parishes still do that to this day. It's the standard of what the church would have. So if you're a pimp, you cannot become an Orthodox Christian. If you do a lot of things, you cannot be an Orthodox Christian. At that time, if you were a soldier, they would allow you to become an Orthodox Christian in 225, 250. They would allow you to become one, but you had to promise to never kill anybody because killing was wrong. But you could not be an Orthodox Christian then and then join the military. Just to give you some perspective.
I heard actor was also on the list too.
You could not be an actor. You could not be a dancer. You could not be like a banker, a loan officer.
And that still applies today too. That the loan officer.
That's what I tell my people. Like, if somebody's already a banker, then I'm like, okay, now we're going to have to figure this out, and you're going to have to understand the ramifications, because everything we do now is under the scrutiny of God Almighty. Like when Jesus says, give to those who ask, he really means give to those who ask. And if we lend to somebody, it says in Luke, lend and don't expect anything back in return. But if your job is to lend, and if somebody doesn't pay you back, it's to go and turn their name in to some other agency that then comes and then breaks into their car and then takes it away, you're liable for that. So it's a serious thing.
And never mind the usury too, like with the interest rates and everything like that, which is just so ridiculous.
Right, usury. Yeah, usury is totally against the church. So anyways, the Didache, it's the earliest church order. It has been dated around AD 48. It contains a brief but complete summary of the Christian faith. It describes the way of life and the way of death, okay? And we're going to specifically go over those two chapters today. It then teaches specific behaviors and orders that are to be carried out in the church. Specific teachings on leadership, prayer, fasting, prayers over the Eucharist, which we call communion today, the obedience that is to be given to the presbytery and the deacons, and also how we respond to prophets, whether somebody is a true prophet or a false prophet. Now, in the church today, we don't have prophets that travel around to meet people. And this is how one of the things is kind of like a proof that the Didache was addressing issues that have been cleared up since, So we don't have traveling prophets going around talking to people. And then instructions on the Lord's Prayer and what days should be fasting days. So, number 2, what is the significance of this document? I'm so glad that you asked that question because it's an important one. The significance of the Didache cannot be underestimated. It is so important. This document was written, or at least it was directed to be written by the 12 apostles. It's also called the teaching of the 12 apostles to the world. The Didache was the document that went with the apostles and their missionaries. And it is the foundational document of the early church because it provided the basic order that was patterned for the ecclesiastical life of all of the local churches. So it was the thing that if we met some guy named the Apostle Paul and he started talking to us and he talked to us about how God patiently bore with people all through history, and then in the fullness of time, God came down and became a man without changing any of his deity, and he entered into death to crush all of death, and he rose from the dead so that people could know they could have eternal life if they turned away from their way in the world and then gave themselves to him as their God and then followed his way. It would have, and if we all were like, we want to follow this theanthropos, this God-man, Christ, we want to follow him, then they would have baptized us. We would have been trained, then they would baptize us, and then they would have guided us in our little local church building which would have been usually at the very beginning, the first 100 years or so, would have been like a big house, the wealthiest person in the church's house, because that's their houses were. And a lot of times they had a door over here and a door over here, and then there was something in the center, so you could have like what looks like deacon doors, even, you know. But anyways, that's totally off the subject. That doesn't really matter. Hey, Anthony, can you flip that light on? But the point is that it was very, very, very important. It is also significant because to this day, the Orthodox Church still lives according to the basic framework laid out in the document. So number one, our doctrine and our moral ethos is what you will see in just a little while. We'll get to the first couple of chapters and you'll see how we are supposed to think, how we are supposed to live. And that has not changed. It has not changed at all. And you'll also see that this is what the apostles and the missionaries took all over the world. And then the Gospels were not written until, which we'll look at again too tonight, the 70s. So when you read the Didache, and this is why everybody thought it came later, because it's so clear to the teachings of Jesus that you just think, well, they could not have written this without having the gospel. But it, in fact, was the oral tradition of the church that said, like, Jesus taught these things that the Didache puts forward. It just wasn't until Matthew, Luke, and Mark wrote down like an ordered account of what happened that they had. So it wasn't like all of a sudden the church is like, oh, we've got to love our enemies. From the very beginning, they were talking about these things. So it's very, very important. So even though this document was fleshed out and expanded upon, it obviously, to the intellectually honest person, it's obvious that the church that remained faithful to the faith that was delivered once for all, the Orthodox Church, still operates its local churches with the foundation spelled out in the Didache. And finally, the final significance of the Didache is in the fact that it was circulated before any of the letters of the apostles or the Gospels that are part of the New Testament. That are part of the New Testament before they were even written. It's amazing. So you have the Didache that was written before the New Testament. If those in the early church were catechized on the teaching of the Didache and knew it intimately before the New Testament scriptures, then I think it behooves us in our present day, and this present day I have here, this day of confusion. We live in the days of confusion. That we should give it a serious study and that we should commit much of it to our memory, since it was those dear saints who were trained by the Didache who turned the world upside down. Just think about it. These people who went all over the world, who lived their life, who died by being eaten by lions and wolves and hyenas and killed by gladiators and killed by torturing and getting their flesh scraped off. Many of them were trained on the Didache. Because the letters of the apostles were sent to particular places, and they did not travel around the whole of the Roman world like this. But what did was the Didache, because it was everywhere. Presumably it was taken with people all over the place.
I've got a question about the timeline of the Didache. So the archaeologists found it in the 1800s, but wouldn't the Orthodox Church already have like a multitude of copies of this?
Yes.
And that it was just ignored until a primary source was found?
It was ignored by the Protestant theologians. So sorry, that's the importance of what it wasn't that the Orthodox Church disbelieved.
No.
But what happened is you did have, after the 1667 split and Peter the Bad came in and all of this garbage happened in Russia, and Constantinople fell to the Turks at the end of the 1400s. Rome had already infiltrated. So you had all this Roman Latin infiltration into the church, and this academic intellectualism came and started chipping away. So then when you had the Protestants in Western Europe influencing people, and the Jesuits influencing people in Kiev and the Kiev seminaries, then all of Russia, which was kind of like the bastion of orthodoxy in the world because it was not under the oppression of anything except a Protestant emperor, basically. And that is oppression. But that messed with them, so they always were listening to the Protestants. And even to this day, if you go to St. Vladimir's, they will laud and they study Protestant intellectuals as if they have more authority. And we have all of these texts. We have all of these primary texts that we could just go to and say, like, what is it? And we have all these writings from great saints from Mount Athos, but also we can study and that have primary sources.
So it was just that because the Orthodox had it within its domain, it was just ignored because, well, that's Orthodox. We don't know for sure. And so we're not going to take it seriously until we find a primary source. Sure,
even now, if you read Roman Catholic literature on the Didache, maybe not the Didache now because most people are saying, like, we just can't deny this.
Yeah.
But like the Apostolic Constitutions, it's like most of the Protestants go to the Roman Catholics. Because in the West, you have to understand, Orthodox Christianity was so small. And we just are so small right now. We're finally, the world is getting exposed to what ancient Christianity was. But since you had the Roman Church took all of Western Europe all the way to Hungary, which is just north of Ukraine. I mean, we're talking like this huge area. And then they had all those Jesuits. And then that is what became Protestant Christianity. And that's what came over to the United States of America. And so the context of academic religious study was, well, what did the Roman Catholics say about this history? Not that the Protestants were upset even with the Roman Catholics, or with the Orthodox. They just thought, well, from the Protestants' standpoint, the oldest church that they knew of was the Roman Catholic Church. So this is the context of academic research in our country. I mean, this is like completely embarrassing, like simplistic explanation, but it kind of just gives a snapshot of the reality, But why is it important? Okay, because we still do the stuff that the Didache talks about. So the way of life and the way of death, of course, is the way that we teach our morality. Then once you get past this, it's like, if you baptize this way. If you do this, do it this way. If you pray, do this. When you're praying over the Eucharist, do this. All of these things. So you see, before the New Testament was written, you see the liturgy. You see confession, public confession, like confession service and so forth. You see all these things that we still do today. Now, again, it was fleshed out, but this is before people had the book of 1 Thessalonians, the book of 2 Thessalonians, the book of 1 Corinthians, the book of 2 Corinthians. So it's pretty significant. I don't want to, belabor this, so we'll just continue on. So here are the order of the scriptures, and now if you study this, this is gonna be debatable. You're gonna find it's gonna be debatable even in the Orthodox Church, but I'm not looking at Protestant sources for these. You're gonna get way different numbers, way different dates from the Protestants. So I took, when I came up with this, I compiled this based on my study of several different Orthodox scholars that I trust, and so this is what I think. So this is not like in stone, because nobody that lives today was there when these were written, obviously. So it's kind of a joke. It's all right to smile. But the point is, we don't know for sure when these were written. We just have a good idea. So First Peter was written in this big, huge window from AD 50. So it could have been the closest. But we just don't know for sure. First Thessalonians, AD 50 to AD 51, which is an important thing because in Paul's first letter, he says, what we have written to you, the tradition that has been handed to you through writing and the tradition through word. And that's from the second book, the second letter that was written, obviously showing that oral transmission of the faith was the primary transmission method right away in the early church. Okay. Second Thessalonians was written very close after AD 51. First and Second Corinthians, AD 55. And actually there was probably a letter written in between those two. And then there was one probably lost, a fourth one, but we don't have it. It's not extant, but it's referred to in other writings from the early church fathers. Romans was written by the Apostle Paul in AD 55 to 57. James, 55 to 60. The book of Paul, these epistles of Ephesians, 61 to 63. Same with Philippians and Colossians. And as far as Galatians, there's not really, people don't really know when that one was written. Obviously, it was before he died, which was around AD 67, but it's open. Second Peter was written probably in between 63 and 67 because Peter also died very close at the same time as Peter. Jude, AD 60 through 80. Philemon, who is that little book that is about the slave of Onesimus, who was so dear to Paul, was written by Paul in 61 to 63 when he was in prison. The letter to Titus, 63. So just think about this, 63, and 1st and 2nd Timothy, 64 to 65, 66 to 67. Now, in the Titus and Timothy books, why it's interesting is the Didache was written in 48. So 15-ish years afterwards, you have these two books where Paul writes to these two. Basically, they're apostolic figures, but we would call them somewhere transitionally between apostle and bishop. Okay, so they're somewhere a little more than a bishop, but not at the level of the apostle Paul or Peter. You know, they're like these high-level apostle, bishop type people. But in those, Paul gives these lessons about how you pick a bishop or how you pick a presbyter in these. 15 years after, we already see that there's bishops and priests being ordained in the Didache. Okay, it's just, these are little things, and some people may be like, oh, Father Stephen, you're such a nerd. This isn't so important. But it is, because there's a lot of people who challenge the validity of the Orthodox Church being the real church that started. And there's just so much proof, and the Didache is just one of the many, many, many proofs that the church has existed from the beginning, and it was not based on sola scriptura.
Kind of a tangent question, forgive me, Father, but I've heard that that bishops of the church today know through tradition like what apostolic lineage that they come from. Is that true?
Yes.
Do we know? Does Bishop John know who his comes from? Out of curiosity.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he has memorized the list, but he can go from who ordained him and those bishops of Rocor, and then who they were ordained by, all the way back to Patriarch Tikhon, and you can trace Patriarch Tikhon back all the way to when the first bishops were ordained in Kiev from the Greeks that came up, so it really is trackable. Now, in some places where there was major persecution, some of the documentation may be burned, but there is documentation all over the world in a lot of these churches in the synod buildings. You want to turn that to maybe 68, so that everybody is freezing.
Does he know what specific apostle that his lineage is in?
Oh yeah, I have no idea.
Okay.
Yeah, I have no idea.
I just thought it'd be a cool fact.
It is pretty neat. It is pretty neat to think about, but I don't know. Yeah, no, that's
being able to trace it that far back is still pretty good, though.
Yeah.
I mean,
So we go on, and you have the book of Hebrews. Now look at this here. Shortly after AD 70, you have the book of Mark. And Matthew was written pretty close. There's debate amongst the scholars who was written first. But this is totally significant. The book of Luke also in between AD 70 and 80. Why is this so significant? Because...
I have no idea how to work that thing, I'm sorry.
That's all right. It's all right. Nick, do you know how to adjust it? You just have to push the arrow that's at top for a couple of seconds, and then it should flash, and then it'll start moving up. Did it go? Then you just tap
Press set, that's all. And what did you want it at?
like 70.
7? Okay,
Go ahead.
Who wrote Hebrews?
yeah, this is interesting because in our
Most people say Paul, but I mean to be totally scholastic, it's nobody. There's not a for sure.
The church doesn't have an official.
Well, you have scholars that are listened to mostly, and then you have great teachers like John Chrysostom will say when Paul wrote the book of Hebrews. So a lot of people just say Hebrews, but I actually think that I think Barnabas probably wrote it. That's my suspicion, but it could be Paul. But the way that it's written is different than a lot of the other letters. If you read the letters of Paul and the letters that he wrote to all these people, and you compare it with the book of Hebrews, it's quite a bit different. And if you think, well, it's a bigger letter, it's 13 chapters, and then you compare it to Romans, which has 16 chapters, it's still the writing style's so immensely different. It's just so in my mind, I think somebody else wrote it, and nobody knows dogmatically, but I think Barnabas wrote it.
Wait, Barnabas wrote what sermons?
The book of Hebrews, but I don't know. It could have been the person who wrote. There's a few letters in the early church. The letter of Matthias to Dionysius. These are similar. Some of these writings are similar, but it's in all of these things, dear ones, you need to understand that this textual criticism and learning about the text is really very unimportant. It's unimportant, but it is something that can be a smokescreen for a lot of people. Like, well, who wrote that, or when did that get written, or that it looks like textually that snippet of that verse was added, or that snippet was taken away, and you can then all of a sudden start having heart pressure and be like, oh no, because we forget that the church started before there was any scripture. And the church did not build itself upon this verse and that chapter, but very much differently. So it really is a non-issue. A lot of these things become issues, but you need to be careful, because if you start talking to somebody and you start contending with them, they may get you like in the octagon and get you stuck in a corner mentally, and then they just bash you as if, because they set you up and put you into a trap, and then they just keep banging you with different information that really doesn't matter. You just have to tell them whether you're right or wrong. It doesn't matter, because your whole presupposition is totally faulty. That's a supposition built on sola scriptura, which we don't accept. We believe that the church and the faith that Christ gave, and that was guided by the Holy Spirit and the apostles, that's what matters. That's what matters to us. So, the scriptures obviously matter. They guide us. The church picked them because they conform to our dogma. But whether a half a verse is missing, or this word is missing, or whatever, it's not a big deal. The book of Acts. This is interesting. Luke wrote his book of the gospel, and then after he wrote the second part of it, which is pretty amazing, because he logs this whole period, and then you have 1 John, 2 John, 3 John written before the book of John. And actually, I've seen some people say that the revelation of John was written before the book of John. I don't know. I don't really have an opinion, but this is just a scholarship. This is what, Orthodox scholarships debate on that stuff. So can you see if this is still recording properly?
Yeah, it's still recording.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to switch over to the lesson on the Didache. So this is like kind of dry, boring stuff at first, and then we're going to really get into the meat here. So does anybody have any questions? Oh, Robert, go ahead. Robert Park raised his hand.
Yeah, I was actually just wondering about the Didache itself. You know how all the books, or a lot of the books in the New Testament, are kind of reference each other.
Yep.
I was just not the contents of the Didache, but just the word Didache. Is that referenced anywhere, even outside of the Bible?
The word actually just means the teaching. So the word Didache, it's like didache, which is information. It just means to teach. So it was probably more properly called the teaching of the 12 apostles to the world officially, and then people just boiled it down and said the Didache, like the teaching, like the Didache of the 12 apostles would have been what they just were like, the teaching. That's what I think it actually is just because that's a really long title. I mean, it's really long. So, okay, any other questions? Here we go. Okay, I'm going to read it, and then we're going to go through just the notes. It's super self-explanatory, so we're not going to tarry very long in this, but if you have a question, feel free. And everybody should have their own like nice copy that you can, put in a binder or something. But these lessons, I also printed them off. So, but the way of life, there are two ways in the first commandment, and this is the text. There are two ways, one of life and one of death, but a great difference between the two ways. The way of life, then, is this. First, you shall love God who made you. Second, love your neighbor as yourself, and do not do to another what you would not want done to you. And of these sayings, the teaching is this. Bless those who curse you, pray for your enemies, and fast for those who persecute you. For what reward is there for loving those who love you? Do not the Gentiles do the same? But love those who hate you, and you shall have no enemies. Abstain from fleshly and worldly lusts. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also, and you shall be perfect. If someone impresses you for 1 mile, go with him 2. If somebody takes your cloak, give him also your coat. If someone takes from you what is yours, ask it not back. For indeed you are not able. Give to everyone who asks you, and ask it not back. For the Father wills that to all should be given of our own blessings free gifts. Happy is he who gives according to the commandment, for he is guileless. Woe to him who receives, for if one receives who has need, he is guiltless. Oh, sorry, that was guiltless up there. Happy is he who gives according to the commandment, for he is guiltless. Woe to him who receives, for he who receives who has need, he is guiltless. But he who receives, not having need, shall pay the penalty. Why he received and for what, and coming into confinement, he shall be examined concerning the things which he has done, and he shall not escape from there until he has paid back the last penny. And also concerning this, it has been said, let your alms sweat in your hands. So, now, this is the way of life, okay? So, and I wrote this today. I went through this, and I just thought I'll just make some bullet points of these things because it'll be easier for you to keep track of. He says this, You shall love God who made you. This is the way to life. Like, if you want to boil it down to one thing, what is the way to life? Love God with your whole heart. Love God who made you. And how do we do that? That's the question we should ask. Because a lot of people say that they love God. Love is loving God a feeling? Is loving God something else? Well, the rest of this is an explanation on how we love God. So how do we love God? So is it me feeling warm and fuzzy? Is it me listening to beautiful guitar music at, sitting back in a recliner? No, it's this. Love your enemy as yourself, or love your neighbor as yourself. This is the expression of how we love God. We love God by loving other people. Ultimately, as you go through this, you'll see, basically, if you do these things, you will become a very humble person who does not judge people. And even some people might think that you are being taken advantage of. So let's look at this. How do we love God? We love God by loving your neighbor. And do not do what you would not want done to you. So first thing, how do you love God? By loving your neighbor. How do I love my neighbor? Well, for sure, I'm not going to do to him anything that I would definitely not want somebody to do to me. So would I want anybody to talk bad about me? Oh boy. Do I like it when people criticize me to other people? Oh boy. Now we ask ourselves, do I criticize people? If the answer is yes, which the answer is yes for almost everybody, unfortunately, even for me, then I need to understand that I'm not loving my neighbor. And if I'm not loving my neighbor, I'm not loving God. Get it? You see how this syllogism works? So this is to bring us to the place of recognizing probably I have a lot of space to grow in my love for God. Does this make sense? We're not bringing these up so that people fall into despondency. This is not, because despondency is pride, like, oh, I thought it was better. But it should kind of put us in a place where we're like, oh, no, I thought I was doing pretty good. And we see to ourselves, like, I'm maybe not doing as good as I had thought I was doing. Does that make sense? And it's not because I want to beat anybody. It's not because the apostles wanted to beat anybody. It's because the apostles wanted us to have life. So how do we have life? We love our neighbor. And we have to get down to the nitty-gritty to figure out how we love our neighbor. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to everybody? This is really, really serious stuff. It's not, this is really, really important. Loving God is what will get you into eternity. Not loving God is what will get you into, you'll get to eternity. Excuse me, don't worry. I promise you, there's no way that you're going to miss that train. But the direction, if you go to the green track, which is with God, or the red track, which is not with God, which is in hell, does not depend on your ability to say the Jesus prayer. Okay? Now, the Jesus prayer may be a tool that you use to help you to learn to love God better. But your loving God is very tangible. It is by loving your neighbor and by being a humble person. So then you have this list. And you can ask yourself as we go through this list, how am I doing on this? So he goes on to say, bless those who curse you and pray for your enemies. So how are we doing when it comes to those who curse us? how the real question is probably for most of you who grew up with the internet and Facebook, how do you deal with those who you think are cursing you? Because most of us don't actually have people cursing us, but we think that they're judging us. So how do we respond to those people that we think are judging us? Whew, baby. And we're supposed to pray for our enemies. So we pray for our enemies, and then we fast for those who persecute you. I think that if everybody in every local parish did this with their whole heart, there would not be any issues in any parishes. Because you want to know, the truth is that people make mistakes. People will say something without thinking. For instance, we're in Erie. I had my family, and I had some other people that came up too, and let's consider all of this big, huge group that came from our parish. They're all my family because I'm their spiritual father, and I paid to take everybody out of this really awesome restaurant, pizza place, and it was super cheap. I can't believe you remember how cheap it was. Anthony was there.
I don't know if I remember.
Oh, I didn't show anybody. It was the pizza. Anyways, what am I doing? Anyways, the pizza was great. Well, somebody got up and he said to somebody something like, "No, it's this," and the other person said, "Well, I didn't even ask about that." And the person who said, "Oh, okay," and then he just walked away. And the person who got responded to, I could see like it really offended that person. The person who said it was just communicating in their way. It wasn't even actually a sin, but for this other person, it was offensive. I could just see it on him. It didn't produce anything because they're mature people, but I could see like, okay, so this is an example. Somebody can say something, mean nothing by it. We can read it wrong. Even if we read it right, what's our response? The best thing to do is just tell yourself you're reading it wrong all the time and that everybody means good to you. Even though we know, like, really, that's probably not the case all the time. If we're doing this, pray for your enemy, fast for those who persecute you, love those who hate you. He says here, if you love those